Ready to?
I am ready. All right. Well, thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Ashley. And good evening to everybody out there. And I just have to ask that general question of, who all out there was really excited when they woke up this morning and you just jumped out of bed, you had that first cup of coffee or your tea or whatever gets you going in the morning, and you're just like, yes, today is the day I get to learn about my septic system. Finally, all the mysteries of the underground world will be unrevealed to me. Well, wait no longer, my friends, you are here. So we're going to, there it goes. We're going to cover some topics here all about septic systems. We're going to talk about the different kinds of systems there are, component overviews, what makes different systems. There's a large variety of them. I'm not going to go into a deep dive into every single septic system because honestly, I don't have that kind of time. But we'll do definitely a high level overview. And if anybody has any direct questions about their specific system, I can either A, try to answer it here in this webinar, or B, my contact information will be available. You can call me, you can email me, and I can help out in that way. So that's going to be the first topic. Then we're going to talk about proper operation and maintenance. What is operation and maintenance? When do you need to do it? Who do you need to call? And deficient systems. What do we need to do to keep our system operating? How do we correct these things? What are deficiencies? And where do we go from there? And then finally, preserving your system, making it work as long as possible for you. So we're going to cover some do's and don'ts. So in Clark County, I usually like to think as septic systems as kind of an infrastructure thing. It's an individual property item. Yes, every single property has an individual septic system, unless of course they're connected to public sewer. But in general, it's an individual thing. But when you look at how the individual systems impact the water quality of the entire county, and you take a step back from the individualism of it all, you actually start recognizing that a healthy, proper, functioning septic system is part of a larger septic system, sewage system, treatment infrastructure for Clark County. So here you'll see me use an acronym because I am part of a government agency, and by law I have to use acronyms. That's the way we roll here. And so on-site sewage system is referred to as an OSS or OSS. So as you see the acronym throughout the presentation, we're talking about septic systems. So currently here in Clark County, there's approximately 34,500 systems that are in operation, and they are responsible for treating and disposing of residential and commercial wastewater throughout the entire county. As you can see here with the map on the left-hand side, every single green dot here roughly estimates where a septic system is. And so you can see it's completely spread out amongst the entire county. You have some in the densely populated areas, you have some in the more rural areas. And so, just to think that if you live in the city, there's not a septic system anywhere near you, you might be very surprised by that. Here in Clark County, we receive 98% of our potable water from the ground aquifer. So deep underground, there's this massive reservoir of groundwater that moves through our region. And so regardless if you're on an individual water well, or if you share a well with a neighbor, or if you're on public sewer, or not public sewer, public water, you're going to be drawing all that water from the ground aquifer. And where public health comes in, part of our mission is we want to make sure that as we are putting water or wastewater back into the ground, that whole water cycle thing, if you think about it, it's recycling back into a ground aquifer that we are just going to pull right back out of. So it's very important that we try to keep these systems maintained and operating as best as we can to keep our drinking water resource as clean as we can. All right, so let's review septic systems. Okay, we're going to start with the basic system. We've got conventional gravity systems. And so I won't go too detailed about it, but essentially, this reaches what we classify as a treatment level E. And the treatment level E is essentially where we are relying on all the bacteria inside the soil to do all the treatment of the sewage before it reaches the groundwater area, where we call the restrictive layer. There's no dissolved oxygen. The bacteria don't really do the treatment for us anymore. And so primary treatment stops at that point. So these days, for gravity systems here, you have to have a 36 plus inches of native soil. It's referred to as test pits, or you'll hear they're going to perk the soil. How well is the soil perk? And so if you've ever seen a new development and they're digging holes in different places where there's no public sewer, where septic systems are going on, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the soils, what kind of soils, how deep do the soils go that are viable for that treatment. And based on the depth of those soils, tells us what kind of drain field system or what kind of system in general a property would qualify for. So here with the septic system in a conventional gravity system, it's pretty basic. What we've got going on here is we have a septic tank, we have a distribution box, and then you have these lateral lines known as the drain field lines. I'll go into the septic tank and the distribution, or into the drain field a little bit more detailed here in just a minute. I'm only going to spend a little bit of time right here on this distribution box here at this slide, because it doesn't really serve any function of treatment for the sewage. Its main job is just usually this little 2x2 box, little concrete box. Is as the sewage comes into that box from the septic tank, it evenly distributes that sewage to all the different drain field lines. Okay, now this is important because if you can imagine one or two lines are getting the bulk majority of the sewage and the other lines are dry, you're going to overload your soil a lot quicker and then your system might prematurely fail. And that's going to cost a lot of money. So having that distribution box there, make sure that it's properly level and properly distributing the effluent in an equal fashion will A, help the treatment of the system and the longevity of the system. So this is a crosscut of a septic tank here. Throughout the county, you're going to see a hodgepodge of different systems. You're going to have a one compartment system and you're going to have a two compartment system. Basically, any kind of system that was installed before 1983 has the potential of being a single compartment system. Anything after 1983, Washington State mandated that all tanks placed in were two compartment for the septic tank. Now, what's the difference? Well, the difference you can see here is you have this concrete wall or plastic wall, depending on what your system or what your tank is constructed out of. A single compartment tank isn't going to have this wall. It's just one big container. Now, a septic system or a septic tank has a couple different functions. It's known as the primary treatment. Primary treatment because it's the first in line to start the treatment process. And the way that the treatment happens in this environment is through an anaerobic process, where again, anaerobic is something where there's no oxygen in the environment, or there's very little oxygen. And so the microbes inside this tank are digesting the sewage. They're using it as their energy as they thrive and move on, but it's at a very, very slow pace. So you're getting some treatment in the tank, but not a robust amount. Aerobic metabolisms are much quicker and much more efficient. For example, we use an aerobic mechanism, to do all of our metabolic activities. We use oxygen, take that oxygen, convert it to carbon dioxide to get all of our cellular energy. So anaerobic does the same thing, except without oxygen. Through that process, it's a much slower process. The primary function of the septic tank is to retain solids. Okay, because as this liquid comes in from the house, it's going to hit a baffle. We call this the inlet baffle. And it's going to come on in here. And the goal of the tank is to hold on to this liquid for about 24 hours. You want about 24 hours when that first molecule of water comes into the tank to when roughly it's heading out of the tank. And during that 24 hours, you want settleability. You do not want a lot of sloshing around. You don't want a lot of mixing. This needs to be staying nice and still as much as you can. And so that's what this inlet baffle is for. It directs the incoming solid state sewage on in down here and not just straight into your tank. Because if you do that, you're going to cause a lot of mixing and not a lot of cellular building. More suspended solids means more solids going through the tank and down to your drain field, where it can start clogging up pipes and causing a lot of problems. So now there's a couple of different layers. The first layer here is the gas layer. As you can probably guess, there's not a lot of oxygen in this layer. And sometimes you'll hear like, oh man, when you open up your septic tank, don't stick your head in there because the gas fumes are going to kill you. Okay, unless you're flushing batteries down your system, like car batteries and things like that, sure, it's very possible that sulfuric gas is emanated in there and it's going to strike you down. But unless you're doing that and you're being completely normal, you're going to pass out because there's no oxygen in there. So if you ever look into your tank and you open up the lid, let it breathe like a fine wine. You got to let it breathe for a moment. Let some air get in there before you start working in there or poking around, because you don't want to stick your head close to there. You get nothing but carbon dioxide, you pass out, and it's just not a good thing for that. The first layer of solid material here we have is the scum layer. And these are items, this is solid material, fats, oils, and greases that are less dense than water. So things are going to float to the top of water. And so as that settles out, this cloudy liquid level becomes next. And this is what we call the effluent. So not a lot of solids in here, but it's that grayish kind of water that we kind of think of when we think of like gray water. And then finally, you have the more dense items of sludge. And I'll let your imagination fill in the blanks of what pretty much comprises the sludge layer. All right, so those are the layers. And if any proper operating tank should have these layers developing, because again, the name of the game here is solid retention. This outlet baffle's sole job in life is to prevent the top layer from forming and heading on down to your drain field. Okay. Speaking about drain fields. So there's a couple different kinds of drain fields out there. The first one, which was the most common, is your pipe and gravel drain field. And what you're going to see here is usually about 2-foot width drain field line. And it's very, very common before the 1990s. And essentially what you got here is you usually got some kind of 3 to 4 inch plastic pipe, maybe some PVC in the later ones. And in some of the really old ones, you're looking at terracotta pipe. And so very fragile. And it spills on out into the gravel bed. And as it spills out, it's interacting with the bacteria, gets on into the native soil, and then the bacteria start interacting with that waste flow and start doing the treatment. After, in the early 1990s, and then in the mid 1990s, this became standard. We moved on to these panels. These panels are about 3 feet wide and 4 feet long, and they come in sections. And what that allowed us to do is shrink the size of the drain field. Because what they're doing is they're imitating in this huge open space here, they're imitating the same amount of volume that you have between all this rock. You get a lot more surface area and the same amount of volume. And so when designers and the health department are working together, depending on what kind of soil you're having, you can go ahead and say, well, I'd like to take a 40% reduction or a 60% reduction of the total size of the drain field because we're going to use panels instead. So it really helps with the footprint of it. In addition, as you can probably imagine, hauling rocks and placing rocks and everything like that, it's heavy and it's expensive. So pretty much the entire industry since the mid 1990s has transitioned on over to panels. So one of the questions I often got asked a lot is, you keep talking about bacteria. They're doing the treatment for us in the soil. How does that happen? And I would say to you, that is a fantastic question. And I have a slide prepared just for that question. So the answer is there's a lot of ways. there's so many ways that the bacteria inside the soil profile help us with the treatment of the system. But if you really want to boil it down to three major items, it's this. The natural bacteria will outcompete the incoming sewage bacteria for space. To kind of help illustrate this thought, if we've all been to our wonderful Oregon coast, Washington coast, and you go over to the tide pools or you go on over to the rocky outcrops, what do you see? You see just gobs and gobs of shellfish and mussels. And they're all crammed in there to every single little nook and corner. And so if you imagine, if you take that big boulder there at the coast and you shrink it on down to the size of a little grain of soil, that's what you got. You got that little grain of soil, you got all the natural bacteria acting as the mussels and clams and all the other stuff already living there. And then you have incoming sewage bacteria that need to set up shop and establish themselves. And as you can see, that's kind of hard to do. There's just really no space for those bacteria to settle on down and get in there. So basically, they get outcompeted for space. And because they're getting outcompeted for space, they're also going to get outcompeted for nutrients. All these bacteria, they're going to take all those nutrients that are coming in with the sewage stream and just take it all in. And so these other bacteria from our sewage is being basically outmuscled and starved out. And then there are some organisms, as illustrated by my friendly sea otter and army of starfish here, that will go ahead and hunt down and prey these bacteria. So in a nutshell, that's how soils treat sewage. Now, one thing I would like to add to this, one reason why we talk about, don't flush your medication down, don't use a lot of strong nitrates, or don't flush your paint down. There's no soil that's going to retain or treat that. At best, the soil might retain it and like latch onto it, depending on what the electrical chemical balances of the molecule are that you're flushing on down. For example, nitrates. Nitrates aren't going to be treated in this environment, but sometimes if the soil is correctly, the soil will retain it and just kind of hold on to it. That's not actually going to treat it. Eventually, the soil can't retain everything forever. So yeah, this is really focused on a biological treatment process. Right. Pressure distribution. So pressure distribution systems have the same components essentially as a conventional gravity. So we're still using treatment level E. And again, that's just, we're completely relying on the bacteria inside the soil to do all the heavy lifting for us. They're going to do all the treatment for us. The difference here, though, is we've only got 24 to 36 inches of native soil to work with. So we don't have 36 or more inches to work with. We have a shorter amount. So the solution is by pressurizing these lines, these 1.25 PVC lines, you're spraying out all that sewage evenly throughout the entire drain field in a single dosage. If you think about a gravity system, as that sewage enters into those pipes, which holes are they going to fall through first? They're going to fall through those first couple holes first. So those first couple holes are going to get the bulk majority of the sewage on the front end of a pipe, whereas on over at the back end of the pipe, it's going to remain relatively dry. And so by having a pressure distribution system, we are equally flushing out all that sewage amongst the soil. And so we can rely on less amount of soil to do the same amount of treatment as we would for gravity. The components that you're looking at, again, you're going to have a septic tank. The difference here, though, is you're going to have a pump chamber, which usually is its own separate tank that's right after the septic tank. Now, the pump chamber doesn't do any kind of treatment for us. All it does is it houses the pumping unit, which we'll get to here in a minute. You'll have a high water alarm, and instead of a distribution box, you're going to have a valve box. Now, the only thing I'll say about the valve box is there's really nothing to look at. Your inspector might look at it, make sure that the valves are good. If you need to adjust flow to one line or another for whatever reason, that's about what you're looking at there. Now, there is a difference between pumping to gravity and pressure distribution. Pumping to gravity, you're still going to have this pump chamber and pump vault, and it moves it up to the distribution box and then allows gravity to take over from there. Again, pressure distribution, we are pressurizing the entire drain and moving it along. So your typical effluent pumps, you're going to have a pump and you're going to have these floats that are here. You're going to have two different kinds. A lot of the older systems are going to have on-demand dosing, which essentially is you have a float. As the water level raises, the float goes up, low ball bearing falls back, triggers the pump to turn on, pump turns on for so long, and then it turns off. One of the drawbacks to the on-demand dosing is that it is subject to flooding out your drain field if you have leaking appliances inside your house. And so one of the key things that I really hope that you guys take away from this presentation, among a whole bunch of other things, is make sure that your toilets are leaking, make sure that your washing machine isn't leaking, make sure that your faucets aren't leaking. An example here is a leaking toilet can add about 180 gallons per day to your system, and that's only at 1/8 gallon per minute. You add that up, that's 65,700 gallons per year of unnecessary amount of water that is being pumped out to your drain field. So it's really important to make sure once in a while you can check your fixtures. An easy way to make sure that your toilet isn't flooded. That's a whole different public health issue right there. One other issue is to take food coloring, put it in the tower of the bowl or of the toilet, and see if that food coloring makes its way to the bowl of the toilet by itself. And if that's what's happening, then you have a leaky toilet that's just adding water to your system for however long it's been used. You could also have time dosing. That's much more of a modern way to go, where it still operates on the similar idea where you have a float. And when the float goes on, it signals a control panel saying, hey, there's enough effluent in the pump chamber for a dose. Now, the nice thing about this is the control panel knows there should only be 4 doses a day between 6 hours intervals. And so the control panel will say, well, sure, there's enough in there, but it's not time for a dose. So it's going to hold off on sending that dose to the drain field until the right amount of time has passed by to then send off the dose. And if your high water alarm sounds, then that is something really important for both either on-demand or time dosing to go ahead and take an investigative approach. Don't just hit the snooze button on it. Take a look what's going on. Your pump could be running out. You could have a bad float. With time dose systems, it could be a leaky fixture inside your house. That happens a lot. So, okay. So we've talked predominantly all about the simple ones being gravity, pump to gravity, and pressure distribution. Now we dive into systems that need pre-treatment. So we're talking treatment levels C, B, and A. A being a lot of pre-treatment is required. And essentially what you got going on here is there's less than 24 inches of native soil to do all the treatments. So now we have to step in and do some kind of pre-treatment before it gets kicked out to the drain field. So we got to knock down the strength of the sewage before it gets down there. There's a lot of pre-treatment devices. I'm going to go over some of the public domain ones and some rough proprietary ones that are pretty common here in the county. If you have any specific questions about your system, feel free to give me an email and I'd be more than happy to help you. So intermittent sand filters, what you got here, so here's your pump chamber. When that thing gets signaled to dose your system, it pressurizes the line and it comes into the sand filter. The big tank with gravel on top, sand on the bottom, gravel on the bottom. Or gravel on the top, sand in the middle, gravel on the bottom. There we go. I've done this before. And essentially what's happening is the exact same thing as you can think of. Is there's a whole bunch of bacteria and microbes in here that as that sewage filters on down through the sand, it's going to start knocking down and treating that sewage level or the sewage strength level. And eventually what happens is it gets on down to the bottom, comes on out, goes into a central pump vault in the middle of the sand filter. The pump vault has its own set of floats, which then tells it when to kick on. And then it takes this treated sewage. Remember, it's not fully treated, but it's been really well done. And then that kicks it on out to the drain field for the final treatment and disposal back into the ground. One quick note here. So if your system is operating on a time dose, the time dose will be in that first pump chamber. Everything else after that is going to be on demand. You only need one item at the front setting the time. Sand mounds, these are those big mounds that I like to not see parked trailers or have trees sprouting out of, or people taking their BMX bikes and making huge ramps on. That is your drain field. Treated well. Essentially the same concept as an intermittent sand filter. The only difference is we've built up a mound of sand. So the pressurized effluent from the pump chamber is coming up here and then gets sprayed out into this gravel area or panels, and then filters through the sand. And then once it filters through the sand, it's going to hit native soil for the final treatment and disposal. Your sand filter or your sand mound, if you have one, should be nice and sloped, usually about a 3-to-1 slope. And again, grass and some small bushes, is okay. Bushes, definitely not trees though. You do not want trees. We'll get into trees. Aerobic treatment units. This is a generalized picture of an aerobic treatment unit. There's a lot of different proprietary units out there that are very specific to how they decide to do it. But essentially what you're doing is you have your first tank here, which is called your trash tank, which is essentially a small septic tank. The whole name of the game here, solid retention. That effluent kicks on into here where you have an air pump. And that air pump is blowing air into this aerobic treatment area. And the small little bubbles are aerating the water. And as we've discussed, if you can switch your treatment from anaerobic to aerobic, then the bacteria in the aerobic area can digest and metabolize that sewage waste a lot more efficiently than the anaerobic bacteria. And so this is where all your treatment is starting to happen right here. If you ever see going down Highway 14, like towards Camas, once in a while you'll pass through their wastewater treatment area and you'll see like a stack and there's sewage just pouring out and going on through. It might look gross, but there's a lot of science and biology happening right there. Because essentially that's what they're doing. They're taking all that sewage, they're pumping it up, they're spraying it out, and it's getting a lot of mixture, it's getting a lot of aeration, and so the bacteria in there are getting all the oxygen that they need to go ahead and start doing the digestion. We're going to come on over here to disinfections next. Before we do that, though, there are two types of ATUs. There's fixed and free floating. Free floating is essentially the bacteria are floating freely within the water column to do all the treatment. Fixed media is where there'll be a little pump that pumps it over like this mesh material. And the bacteria are all on that mesh and they're fixed to that mesh. So as the sewage is poured over them, they enjoy life and live to the fullest. All right, disinfection. So pretty much all systems in Clark County, if there's a disinfection unit attached to them, it's going to be ultraviolet disinfection. And essentially what's happening here is you're taking ultraviolet light and it beams on out through this sewage column. So as the sewage is traveling from the aeration chamber to the clarifying, goes through this pipe, comes down and travels through here. This whole time that it's traveling through this area before it gets discharged into the pump chamber, it's receiving ultraviolet disinfection. And so essentially what's happening here is that that ultraviolet photon, that light photon, is coming on into the DNA of the bacteria that are remaining, and it breaks up the chemical bonds inside that DNA sequence. Now, oftentimes this doesn't kill the bacteria, but it does neutralize them in the fact that they can no longer proliferate. And so by doing that, you're just knocking down the strength of the sewage just a little bit more after the aeration and any bacteria that's still left before it gets pumped back to the drain field for final disposal and treatment. There are two other ones that I'm not really going to go into. There's chlorination disinfection, and then there's ozone disinfection. There are no systems like that in Clark County that utilize that. Chlorination works essentially the same as if you were at a pool. You have these little chlorination tablets, and you just got to keep it filled. You have the chlorination tank, and then you have a dechlorination tank, because pumping out chlorinated water to your drain field is a surefire way of killing all the microbes that you want to keep in your drain field. So ozone is very effective for disinfection, but it's very expensive. It's very power consumption. Ozone is created when you have oxygen molecules and you have a huge amount of electricity that binds those molecules together from O2 to O3. You know, when you think about it, when you're at a lightning storm, you hear, when you see the flashes of lightning and you smell the ozone is being created by the lightning, enough voltage in it to do that. So, yeah. Okay, so that was a good quick overview of the system here. I'm going to pause for just a moment. Do we have any questions regarding that segment over there?
Yes, we have one question, and I don't really know if this is the best time to ask it, so I'm going to go for it. This person said, we have 2 green lids in our front yard in Camas Deer Creek subdivision. Landscapers covered one with gravel. What are the ramifications?
That's actually not a bad question right there. The ramifications, I don't think there's any huge negative impact that it's going to have, except you're placing additional weight on top of your septic lid, and you got to remember where the darn thing is. So, you know, it's good to know where those lids are, and it's good to keep an eye on those lids because we want to make sure those lids are properly attached and properly maintained, because you don't want to step on one, have it flip or collapse or anything like that. So I highly encourage you that you don't gravel over that. I do know that there are some people that find those big fake rocks that you can put over a green lid, so it looks like 2 big rocks out in your lawn or something like that. Something like that, I think is fine. But yeah, I knowing where those lids are is kind of a safety item on mine. So, but I don't think it's detrimental to the function of the system itself.
And one last thing, it's not that big of a deal, but you kind of are cutting out occasionally, and I'm just wondering if maybe you did turn off your video for this next little portion, if that might help with just
we can definitely do that.
Okay.
All right, there we go. We're gonna give that a try. All right, marching on then. So proper operation maintenance. When do I perform it? Who do I call? And correcting deficient systems. All right, so legal stuff. Operation maintenance. So under Washington Administrative Code, it's the OSS owner's responsibility for operating, monitoring, and maintaining the system to minimize the risk of failure. Our local code, Clark County Code 2417, follows the law. So essentially, it is the property owner's responsibility for the maintenance and operation of the system. All right, so besides the law, there's got to be some common sense behind it. Well, lucky for us, there's lots of common sense behind it. So making sure that your system is properly maintained and functioning helps public health achieve a lot of goals, and 3 big ones. Protecting the drinking water resource. As we've already hit, 90% of our water comes from the ground aquifer. So if we have proper working septic systems that are treating and disposing correctly, then we are preserving that resource to the best of our abilities. We want to prevent direct exposure of pathogens to people. So obviously, if you have surfacing sewage and it's going down your driveway, and I've seen this, going down your driveway and going onto the roadway, and people driving through that, people are walking by that, that's a direct exposure. You have some friends' kids on over, there's a puddle out in the backyard of surfacing sewage. Obviously, kids are gonna be kids. They go wherever the water is, my kids do that. So then there's other indirect exposures that we don't really think about. Where, if you have surfacing sewage in the yard, that's going to drive up worms and grubs and then other things that don't want to be there, and that attracts birds. Birds come in, they walk around, they get all the grubs, and they fly on over to your neighbor's back patio and on their porch goods and things like that. And the bacteria are kind of hitching a ride on the birds. So there's other things. Dogs can get into it and bring it on into the house and different things like that. And finally, we are interested in protecting your investment as a homeowner. Like, maintaining a house is time intensive and it's not cheap. And the way we look at this is prevention and operational maintenance. I mean, it might cost you some money up in the front, but if you choose to ignore it over a long period of time, not only are you going to start potentially having a degree of less treatment and less disposal, thus hurting the greater water infrastructure, but then you having to replace the system because it's failed is a lot of money, or connecting to public sewer. So making those repairs, like replacing the baffle or having your tank pumped, or having those lines jetted, or having that tree removed. I mean, it hurts the pocketbook a little bit, but if you can do that to preserve your system for years to come, then you're going to save yourself a lot of money in the long run. So who do I call? Well, we have a whole bunch of people. Septic system installers, inspectors, and pumpers are certified through Clark County Public Health. We have these lists. They go out in our mailings to remind when people are due for inspection. And we also have all this information available on our website. And it's really important that only certified professionals work on these systems. Okay, they've shown some degree of competence, and we regulate this industry. And unfortunately, I've had my run-ins of people saying, "Oh yeah, it's fine. I got a new system last year." And we're like, "What do you mean you got a new system last year? We have no permits. We have nothing." "Oh, I got this guy. He does septic systems." "Who is this guy?" "Oh, I can't remember his name." "What did he do?" "He dug it 50 inches down there." "Oh, into the water table." "Cool. So guess what? You get a whole new septic system all over again." So it's just good to start at the beginning, get a designer who's licensed through Washington Department of Licensing, go through the permit process, because there's a lot of liability. Like, you don't want to mess up your own installation. You don't want to put an installation too close to your own well, or even your neighbor's well, because that could just cost you more money going down the line. So let's kind of look at some items here. If I look in my septic tank, what am I looking for? What is good, what is bad, and what is just that? Well, the good. So when you're looking at your tank, this is what you want to see, okay? You want to see a good, healthy level where that sewage, that effluent, is just entering that pipe to go on down to the drain. This, of course, works for gravity systems and also works for your system heading on down to the pump chamber. Okay, so this tells me good retention is happening, it's not leaking, and it's operating the way it should. These here are baffle filters. So you put these on the outlet side of your baffle, and they just kind of catch that particulate matter and hold it inside the filter. We recommend that you clean that once a year by taking it out, or you can have your inspector take it out, bring it on over to the inlet side, and hose it off with a garden hose. What you don't want to see, here we have a homemade riser. And the septic tank is actually about 2 feet underneath this. So sewage is happening to come on up and bubble on over. So definitely there's some issues in the drain field. It could be a broken transport line, busted distribution box, or just complete oversaturation of the drain field. Here we have a leaking tank. And if you imagine, like, it should be here, but the liquid levels are actually here. And so what you have is all this soil profile that would have done all that treatment is just being skipped. So basically you're discharging raw sewage straight into the groundwater. And of course, the ugly. Now, I would like to think, because I've invested hours upon hours of video games, that I would have the cat-like reflexes necessary to jump off of this tractor before I went for a swim. I'm not willing to put that to the test, but I like to think that I would make it. Here, what we see is a collapse of the lid on top of the tank. Lids over time will develop cracks. I mean, it's concrete, it's not going to last forever. And so monitoring that lid and making sure that it's in good condition is very, very important. And finally, this is a good illustration of just solid material. Here we have all of our drain rock. Here's a drain pipe in the drain field, and it's just gunked out with just solid material. And, you know, routine maintenance and pumping would prevent that. So I know $500 for pumping is a tough bill to swallow, but just let it go too long, and pretty soon you're looking at a whole new drain field. Which by last estimates, I think the average septic system in the state of Washington runs about $17,000 to $18,000. So it is not cheap. Your drain field, you should feel confident to be able, you should be able to feel confident standing upon it, maybe having a picnic. Obviously, surfacing sewage, things going down a rainwater gutter, spitting out to the roadway, not so good. And so anytime you start seeing some issues there, time to call in a professional and see what can be done. Other indicators that your system has issues, slow drainage and plumbing, sewage backing up into the house. When sewage backs up into the house, typically it's going to back up into the lowest area of your house, usually your shower or your bathtub. Water always follows the area of least resistance and raises equally as it goes on through. So that's usually the drain to watch for it actually backing up into the structure. Now, as far as slow drainage on the plumbing, sometimes it could honestly just be a clog of your pipes. And so it's always good to go and clear out that clog. And if that resolves the problem, then yeah, it was just a plumbing issue. But if you come to find that that clog just keeps coming back, it just keeps coming back, it just keeps coming back, no matter how much Drano you pour down that thing, which again, we're on a septic system, so let's not use too much Drano. Some Drano is okay, not a lot of Drano. Then obviously that's an indicator that there's something else going on, whether it's a bigger plumbing issue or your system is really backing up. Obviously surfacing sewage onto the ground or the water, sewage pouring out of the clean out. No, this is not radioactive sewage. This is just green dye that I use when called out to places to diagnose once in a while what's going on with this, usually through complaint investigations. So I was not wearing my hazmat suit for this one. Bottom line, don't let this happen to you. I know I'm cutting a little bit on time here for a moment, so I'll host questions at the end. And so we're going to skip on into and don'ts. All right, septic do's. Performing routine operation and maintenance. The whole goal here is to identify the small deficiencies. It's very cost effective, and at the end of the day, you're saving yourself a lot of money and you're protecting public health by making sure that things are working correctly. In addition to doing routine operation and maintenance, you might start picking up on a system that is, 30 years old, 35 years old, 40 years old, is starting to get stressed. And so, for example, if you pop the lids open, the effluent levels are raised up in your septic tank, which, it's not ideal, but you're not surfacing, you're not backing up into the house, and you're using a normal amount of water. This tells us that this system, which might be on the old side, is starting to slow down. It's not failing today, but probably the next couple of years, it might be getting to that point. So it's a good indicator to what is our options here. Is city sewer an option? Is a brand new septic system an option? What's our financing options? Do we need to put some money off to the side a little bit? So it helps you start planning for the future and not just be surprised one day when you flush the toilet and you have to run for cover because your septic system has now decided to fail. Performing strategic operation maintenance. Okay, what does that mean? Strategic operation maintenance is essentially this, the holidays are coming, post-COVID world, massive gatherings once again. And you know what? Maybe I'll just pop my lid open on the tank. How full does the solids look? Does it look really full? Does my system look like it's stressing? Because nothing ruins Christmas like a septic system backing up into my house. Nothing doesn't make my 4th of July barbecue any better when my neighbor says, hey, when did you get the new pond? I'm like, what new pond? Oh, that one over by the drain field. Oh, cool. So, do some strategic operation and maintenance when you're kind of expecting a higher volume of water usage might be good. You don't have to have a certified professional come out and take a look at it. You can look at it yourself at any time. But, if you want a professional to come on out, definitely not a bad idea. Managing your water usage. It's really important. Septic systems are designed, again, you want that retention in the tank. You want a slow drip out into your drain field. You don't want to overtax your pump. And so, maybe instead of doing one entire laundry day, you do maybe a load of laundry once every other day. You kind of space that on out there. Invest in some low water utility items, appliances. So, again, your system works best when it has time to settle out and have some time to take care of itself. Installing risers for quick and easy access is always a benefit. And just be mindful of the location. Where is your drain field? Where is your septic tank? No, cousin Bob can't park his RV over there. They're going to crush my drain field lines. It's just some simple general knowledge to keep your system going is all it really takes. One last item here, let's talk about lids. Lids are great, they're fantastic, but it's really important that we maintain those. We want to make sure that they are screwed into the riser. You can't easily kick it off, you can't easily lift it off, and then it's sturdy. You should be able to stand on that, and it shouldn't wobble, it shouldn't bend, it shouldn't flux. And again, you should be feeling really confident. If it starts bending and flexing, what that tells you is that there's a piece of plywood in here between the resin, and water does get into that plywood and it starts rotting out. And that's what provides the structural support for that lid. If it starts flexing, it's time to replace the lid. You can have a professional do that. You can go get your own lid and replace it. A lot of the new lids no longer use plywood. They're all resin and very structurally secure. As far as I'm aware of here in the state of Washington, we've been fortunate over the last couple of years on this, but I know back in 2016, 2017, we lost children to these things where unfortunately kids step on this because they're giant green lily pads. And what kid doesn't want to step on these? And an unsecure lid, the thing can flip, kid goes in and you might not even know. And unfortunately that has happened in the past. And it did not have to happen. So if you have lids, keep them secure, keep them on eye, and take care of them. All right, septic don'ts. Trees, bushes, or shrubs on the tank or around your drain field. Okay, trees love nutrients. What is sewage? Sewage is just pure nutrients, and they will love it. I'm going to start my video here for just a second to illustrate this. I was at a site, and I don't have enough time to go completely nerdy on biology with you guys. I wish I did, but I don't. But essentially, where there was tree roots inside the tank, and it was just everywhere. And what the tree had done, you have your normal tree-shaped root, and it went in between the concrete lid and the tank, and it completely flattened itself and went through the lid. And then once it got inside the tank, it resumed its normal shape and spread on out. And it cost this guy I don't know, probably $1,000 to get all that stuff removed. A good rule of thumb about trees is essentially how far the farthest branch goes is usually about how far the roots will go. So you kind of use that as a general idea of where those roots are. Evergreens are a little on the different side, but it's kind of the same rule of thumb. And once the trees find a nutrient source, they will send their roots towards it. So be careful. If you need to remove a tree, cut it at the base and leave the stump. Do not take out the stump, or even you can grind the stump if you don't want to look at the stump. I get that, but do not remove the stump. Because what you're going to do is if that tree root has completely entangled itself inside the pipes, once you remove that stump, all those pipes are coming with it. So do not do that. Again, stay clear of strong acids and bases into your system. A little bit of bleach every once in a while is fun, but the continuation of that usage is going to be a detriment to your system. This is a living, breathing organism that does the work more than just a concrete box, sand, and pipes. If you have a garbage disposal, use it sparingly. When you use a garbage disposal, you're sending complex carbohydrates on down to your system. Your bacteria in the tank are really relying on us to have done that initial digestion process, and then they can break it down further. When you send these complex carbohydrates to them, it just takes forever. And so you're going to accumulate a solid layer a lot quicker. Don't ignore the need to pump. And finally, baby wipes, non-degradable wipes. They're part cotton, part plastic, and they will do two things. They're going to clog up your system quickly. And when a pumper gets out there, it's going to cost you a lot more to pump out that tank. And the reason why is that their trucks can only take so much. You get a big old clog of non-biodegradable wipes jammed up into their pipes. They've got to take more time to break that apart and take care of that. And more time on your property is going to cost you more money out of the wallet. So do not do that. Additives. I love this conversation of additives. My basic answer to that is you don't need them. You provide all the love that your system needs. I'm talking about the commercial additives, and I'm talking about all the non-commercial additives. Things like yogurt. I love that one because people are like, oh yeah, it's got probiotics. It's good for my septic system. No, the probiotics are good for you, and then you contribute to the system later. Yeast. What does yeast need to survive? It needs oxygen. What does the tank not have? It doesn't have oxygen. So you flush your packet of yeast and they're all dead. Cabbage, complex carbohydrates or complex rooting vegetable. Very, very hard to digest. Raw meat. I love that one. An older gentleman suggested to me, I just put a pound of hamburger down there and that feeds the bugs. And I say, well, how about you cook that hamburger, have all your neighbors over for a barbecue, and the only price that they have to pay is one deposit in the bathroom, and you've fed the bugs, and you've gotten your neighbors over for a barbecue. It's a win-win. Now, regarding commercial additives, there is a list on Department of Health, and if you're really tired, you can go find this list and have a good read and fall asleep. But basically, it notes that there's no positive effect to a septic system, but there's an approved list of additives because it's been determined that these commercial additives, and there's a whole list of them, that they don't harm the environment. They're on this approved list, not because they help your system, but because they do not harm the environment. Financial aid. There is financial aid resources available. I'll leave this up here for just a quick minute. For major repairs or replacements, Clark County Community Services has a community development and block grant funding available. It's federal dollars. And here on the local level, we have CRAFT 3, which is a partnership between Clark County, Department of Ecology, and Department of Health for low interest loans for replacement of sewer systems. City of Vancouver, Clark Regional Wastewater District, they have SKIP programs to help finance sewer connections as well if you need to connect the sewer. So there is financial aid out there. There is other ones available as well that I did not add to this list yet because perhaps Ashley and Will could add to that. So I know I'm coming up to my time. It is coming up to 7. And so I'm going to add an end with this. Okay, so I want you to take a quick look and just kind of look at this picture, let it sink in for a moment and see if you notice the unique item in this picture. I'm going to give you a second and muse to yourself. Okay, so if you're looking at that right there, that little pinpoint of dot in this weird black picture that this guy from Public Health is showing you today. What is that? Essentially what that is on February 14th, 1990, NASA's Voyager 1 took this picture of our solar system from beyond the orbit of Neptune. It is known as the pale blue dot, and that pale blue dot there is Earth, bathed in the sunlight of our home star. And it reminds me again, and it just makes me excited and happy that we're all working together. I'm glad you are all here with us to talk about your septic system for the conservation of clean water, healthy water, because that's our home right there. And that's, as far as we're aware of right now, that's the only one we've got. So it's really important to take good care of ourselves and really good care of our home. All right, enough of my astronomical nerdiness. I will now open it up to questions.
Thank you so much. We are a little bit over time at 7:01, but it looks like we have one question. So I'll go ahead and ask it and then we will wrap it up. The question is recommendations on types of toilet paper.
Basically, as far as I'm aware of, there is no consensus. There's no data out there that suggests that one type of toilet paper breaks down better than a different kind of toilet paper. They all eventually do break down. I've heard rumors that don't use Kirkland brand or don't use Charmin or don't do this. I don't know. It's toilet paper. It will degrade over time. Again, the key thing about toilet paper is it's all cotton and paper based. So it won't stay in there like the non-degradable wipes, because those are intermeshed with plastic, which is not.
I know I once asked about a bidet too as an alternative form too as well. So there's alternatives out there.
There are alternatives out there. And the thing about the bidet, and this is completely a rhetorical item, like, is it better to use toilet paper that's going to dissolve in the tank and slightly add to the solid layer over time, or is it better to use a bidet that's going to increase your water usage into your system? So it's a preference there.
Well, thank you, Sean, so much. Your contact information is on the screen right now. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to contact Sean. And as Nikki mentioned, we have 6 more webinars in this series. So if you are interested in joining us for any of the other topics, please check out our website, clarkcd.org / I think it's HHHW for healthy homes, healthy water. So we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.